Hello, my friends. Hello, my life warriors, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Day In, Day Out podcast. Woo! Today on episode, two, free. I was very lucky to have Lyn Yaffe on the podcast. He is the chairman, CEO of EPR Technologies, Inc. Yeah, we talked about his company and how he basically founded it. We also talked about the sort of key research they've been doing to help with trauma victims out there, and basically some of the challenges he's facing with like getting his company started and getting it out there. All I've got to simply say is this: I could listen to this gentleman forever and one day. His knowledge is vast and great. I look forward to talking with him in the future, maybe about film sometime in the future, but nevertheless I look forward to his return. So please sit back, enjoy the show, and enjoy. Haha. Peace. There we go, baby. Hello, my friends. Hello, my life warriors, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Day In, Day Out podcast. Woo! Today on episode, oh my God, it's 300 and, no, not 300, 233. Yes, I have Lyn Yaffe, who is the chairman and CEO of CPR Technologies, Inc. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you
Pleasure
too, sir.
being on your podcast.
Excellent. Now, I have to ask. I've looked through all your information. I've looked through the research, and I've sat there, turned the piece of paper to the side, turned it around again, and sometimes I've been a little bit confused about what exactly, ERP Technology Inc. does. What do you do exactly?
Well, I'll say very briefly, and then I'll give a little more background, obviously, as we go.
Mm.
If people are in an accident or a traumatic event, it could be a shooting, it's fairly common here in the U.S., could be a combat casualty, and they bleed to the point of going into cardiac arrest. They then need cardiopulmonary resuscitation, if that's available from someone. They need other emergency medicine interventions. Or if someone just has a sudden cardiac arrest and needs CPR without there being any trauma. If a bystander is there or a paramedic, an emergency personnel who can administer CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, well, hopefully they'll get your heart started. If they can't get your heart started, essentially it's over. Maybe they'll try for 30 minutes in a situation, but if they can't get your heart started by chest compressions, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and defibrillation, essentially that's it, you're dead. What EPR is pursuing is the use of rapid profound hypothermia. That is, when CPR fails, you rapidly, and by rapidly I mean within about 7 minutes or less, you cool someone down to a low temperature where the body no longer needs oxygen for a limited period of time. This is not freezing. You're not frozen. Yeah, and so you're quickly cooled down. And at that low temperature, you essentially buy time for the paramedics to take you to the hospital for surgical interventions to do repairs, and for you to then have delayed resuscitation. I mean, those patients who suffer trauma and bleed to the point of cardiac arrest, or if you've had a sudden cardiac arrest for some underlying heart condition or problem, usually there's no time to intervene other than doing CPR. And if that doesn't work because you've lost blood or there's a heart problem that you can't get beyond with CPR, you're dead. So EPR, rapid profound hypothermia, is the idea of a temporary, to use a science fiction term, though what we're trying to do is not science fiction, temporary suspended animation. for 3 hours. That buys time to get back to the trauma center, to the hospital, and then the surgeons can do reparative work. And then the cooling procedure replaced your blood with ice cold saline. That's how the cooling works, how you get them cold very quickly. So then after the surgical repairs, you're put on a heart-lung machine, cardiopulmonary bypass machine. Blood is given back to you and you're rewarmed. And when your heart gets up to normothermic temperatures, which is, let's say, 34, 35, 36 degrees centigrade, normal is 37 Celsius or centigrade, your heart either spontaneously starts, or at that point they'll do defibrillation and your heart is restarted. Now that, essentially what we're doing then is delayed resuscitation. We're getting beyond that hurdle that CPR couldn't get you through, and we're getting you to the point where you have, you're now resuscitated. Of course, you have all of the medical problems that you had before we resuscitated you, like depending on the underlying problems, you may have had some what's called organ system failure. You may still be in critical condition. So, you know, the outcome is dependent on other medical interventions during the next few days, let's say. It's just like if CPR does work and they get your heart started, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to walk out 100% healthy out of the hospital.
Yeah.
So what EPR does is give you one more chance at survival, one more chance for your loved one to survive. A little bit of historical context is you may have heard of, or people may have heard of, that a healthy young skier is caught in an avalanche, and the skier is buried in the avalanche, and it takes an hour for rescuers to find them. And when they find them, they're completely unconscious, no heartbeat, no evidence of life. They're not breathing, their heart is not beating, yet they are able to quickly rewarm them, defibrillate them, and get their heart started. In one sense, we're trying to do the same, not with a healthy person, but with a person who has been traumatized, has had cardiac arrest, bleeding, sudden cardiac arrest, to put them in that temporary period of suspended animation. Now, as a skier, someone who's caught in an avalanche, and there's some reported cases where people have fallen under a frozen lake, and they become cold enough, fast enough that once they're rescued, there's a chance that they can be resuscitated. So, you know, that's sort of the idea that shows this is possible to do. You know, in elective neurovascular surgery, sometimes when they're doing critical brain surgery, they will cool a patient down a little bit, not as far as we go, let's say 5 to 10 degrees centigrade, but under a controlled surgical situation, they might cool a patient down to, let's say, 18 or 20 degrees Celsius while they're on cardiopulmonary bypass. So it's a very controlled situation. So they can lower blood pressure while they're doing arterial surgery in the brain. They don't want to accidentally have a big bleed. So there is evidence that this has a strong possibility of working successfully, and it works very well in large animals. A lot of research has been done in pigs, which is a very good model, good physiological model for human beings. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say a lot about the ongoing feasibility clinical trial here in the US, because our trauma surgeon and the US Food and Drug Administration, they like to wait till the study is completed for reporting results. But when this study was started in 2019, there was a report published in a lot of scientific news magazines. It was in about 15, I think it was in Newsweek, Scientific American, a lot of places where it said that researchers or surgeon had successfully placed a human being in suspended animation. And they were referring to rapid profound hypothermia initially being done in one patient. And that's the most I should really say about it, because that's been reported in the news media.
Yeah, because yeah, I hear you. Because when you say suspended animation, and like much of the sort of sci-fi things go to sort of space travel and like basically preserving the human body until they arrive to their destination. How many?
Exactly. You could see that in Stanley Kubrick's and Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes.
And in more recently in the movies Alien.
Yes.
With Sigourney Weaver, that starts out they're all coming out of suspended animation, if you recall that. And really, suspended animation, even in that extreme science fiction sense, it's a situation where you lower the body's metabolism and requirement for oxygen and a beating heart almost to zero. And really, the best thing for doing that currently in human beings is a low temperature between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. That's the closest we can get. There's ongoing research in trying to understand hibernation, because in one sense, hibernation in animals like bears and smaller animals, there's a northern ground squirrel that hibernates. They lower their metabolic rate, their heartbeat goes down. And so we're sort of an extreme situation of that, where we eliminate breathing in the heartbeat and we reduce your energy requirements almost to the point of zero. You still have cellular life.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, otherwise you could never be resuscitated. So, the techniques and the products, what we're pursuing to make this happen. I should give credit that the person behind this is Dr. Peter Safar. And Dr. Peter Safar, he was born in Austria in 1924, and he was a hospital orderly during World War II, then subsequently got his medical degree. He came to the United States in the after World War II in the early 50s, and he was working in Baltimore, and he developed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Prior to that, they did situations where they would raise your arms, and they had all these techniques that were being tried, but none of them were successful in delivering oxygen. So Dr. Peter Safar, together with an associate of his, James Elam from Texas, they developed the precise techniques of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and that was funded by the U.S. Army at the time. That was in the 1952 to 1955 approximately, and they put it together with chest compressions that had been, as I recall, originally developed by George Cryle. Much earlier, like in the 1920s, but it was never really successful because one had to have adequate ventilation. And so in the 50s, Dr. Safar put together his technique of mouth-to-mouth with chest compressions and established a clear technique that worked. And he wrote a book called The ABCs of Resuscitation, which came in those days sort of the Bible of resuscitation and CPR. A was airway. Make sure the airway is open before you do mouth-to-mouth, tilt the head back. B was breathing, and C, chest compressions, or you could say circulation. Those were the ABCs. And in those early days, there were no paramedics. There were only ambulance drivers. And Dr. Safar was a very energetic, forward-thinking guy. And because now he had CPR, how do you get CPR out into the field at the point of injury? You don't wait until someone arrives at the hospital and they've been not breathing for 15 minutes. So he took a group of African American guys and a few women who at the time were janitors at the hospital or unemployed. And he trained them to be paramedics. And so the first paramedics in the US were African American, and it was called Freedom House. And he did that in the early 1960s. And it became the model for a paramedic service throughout the world, really. And he designed the first paramedic ambulance. And Pittsburgh, where this was done at the University of Pittsburgh, really had the first effective paramedic service. At the time, Dr. Safar's protege was an MD. Her name was Nancy Caroline. And after she did Freedom House under Dr. Safar and finished her training, she went on to Israel. And Nancy Caroline, she and Dr. Safar are both dead now, but she is considered the mother of the Israeli equivalent of the American Red Cross. So she's sort of the mother of paramedics in Israel and is well known there. So Dr. Safar, through his proteges, has been instrumental in moving emergency medicine, CPR out into the world. And then he was always interested in hypothermia. So at the end of the Vietnam War, he and an associate of his, Colonel Ronald Bellamy, they looked at why Americans, what were the reasons they died on the battlefield, and they looked at all the autopsy data. A large number of killed in action. They had autopsies performed, and I think that's still done for killed in actions. They'll do full body MRIs to gather all the information. But for Vietnam, it was observed that 80% of those who died in combat without head injury, obviously, if you have a massive head injury, there's nothing that really can be done. But 80% of those without head injury who still died in combat, they died from rapid bleeding, exsanguination from the trunk, internal bleeding, external bleeding. And there on the battlefield, with that tremendous loss of blood, there's not enough fluid or blood available for the paramedics to get them to some point where they can attempt to save their lives. So Dr. Safar and Colonel Bellamy came up with the idea of suspended animation. They called it initially rapid profound hypothermia. And in the early medical literature, it's referred to as suspended animation. I prefer to call it temporary suspended animation because we're not taking anyone to Mars just yet. But then we moved it to emergency preservation and resuscitation.
Yeah.
Dr. Safar died in 2003. He was he was almost 79. And I got to work with him on aspects of this from about 1995 until his death, because he was having lab conferences, in his hospital room, still directing what was being done. He was quite an amazing guy, really. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize 3 different times.
Oh my
God.
But,
it's a competition, so he didn't get it. But he's had numerous awards, as many as you can receive. In Austria, he was given it's the one that sticks out in my mind. He was given the highest civilian award that Austria, because he was Austrian born, that one can receive. So he had a phenomenal career, and EPR Technologies is really dedicated to fulfilling his goal of making temporary suspended animation, rapid profound hypothermia, EPR, emergency preservation, and resuscitation, delayed resuscitation, a reality. And so there's a feasibility clinical trial going on in the U.S.
Yeah. I have to stop you real quick for one moment.
Sure.
Because this is the thing. Anyone who's listened to this podcast just over the airwaves, who's not watching the video, I got to say, when you are talking about the history and the journey of it, there is your face lit up with so much joy. It was talking about yes, your mentor for this, talking about the work they did, bringing in paramedics, figuring out suspended animation, EPR, and bringing it, coming up to how your company's being formed, which I'm sure you're about to tell me. I got to say, simply so much joy coming off of you. I got to say.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. I am always very excited about this. And, Peter Safar, when he was doing all of this research at the University of Pittsburgh, he was running what he called the International Center for Resuscitation Research. And then when he became professor emeritus and turned the research center over to someone else, who was Dr. Pat Kahanick now, they renamed the center the Safar Center for Resuscitation Research, which is still very strong in research and basic research at the University of Pittsburgh in both resuscitation and brain injury. And they have many fellows there from around the world each year are participating. And now this feasibility clinical trial that I mentioned is being done at Maryland Shock Trauma in Baltimore under the leadership, the trial leadership of Dr. Sam Tischerman. Maryland Shock Trauma is a really state-of-the-art trauma center. There are many fine trauma centers, but it is certainly one of the very top ones. It's a sort of a standalone trauma center. They can bring in a helicopter trauma victim from an auto accident or a shooting. They land them right on the roof of the trauma center. Elevator doors open, patients put in, and sort of one elevator floor down, they're in the trauma bay for treatment. So it's a very rapid, point of injury to trauma care facility. And it's an outstanding place. So, as you say, I want to talk about EPR technologies. And since you mentioned it, as things move forward, some of the people involved who have no conflict of interest. I mean, if you're involved directly in the clinical trial, that's conflict of interest. If you're at the university doing research, that's a conflict of interest. So we're very careful about keeping the lines of demarcation. But some of the people who are involved with the early research, who are now into different things, with everyone's approval, we started a company and took a number of years to get the FDA to look carefully at a feasibility trial. The company has really been operating without any funds. Maybe the co-founders put in small amounts, but it's not as like we've had a lot of funding or any funding really to this point. But now we're trying to move on finding investors. And the first thing that we've done with some help from some people is to what's popular now is crowdfunding. I don't know if you've heard of crowdfunding.
Oh yeah, I have.
That's probably available in England. In the U.S., it's become sort of a very prominent endeavor for startup companies, where initial step might be looking for $1 million US, whatever that is in pounds, I don't know, $1 million US to start. The U.S. Security and Exchange Commission has strict rules about what you can say. I can certainly mention the site, the crowdfunding site where we're listed. And if people are interested, they can go there to read all about it. There's a lot of extensively information on it. If people are interested in reading all of this, finding the terms and investing. I made a little sign because the address is long. I mean, I can speak the address, but I could also hold up the sign if that's permissible.
Well, put it this way, I'll put all that information into the show notes. So yeah, if you want to show the sign, you can show the sign, but they will get that is a long.
The top line is www.startengine. That's the crowdfunding site.com /EPR-technologies. So if you go to that website, it'll give you all of the information for you to consider investing, from small amounts to a large amount. Under that is our website, which also has a lot of background information. So,
yeah,
I have it's an interesting endeavor.
Yeah, I have to ask, with regards to the sort of realm of investment you just mentioned. Now with, how can I say, there was a rather big sort of medical company which went to the wall because of a rather dodgy owner. You're not dodgy, but she was dodgy with regards to blood analysis, Theranos and all of that.
Yes.
Have you found the sort of like investment field or market being a little bit more challenging because of that high profile case?
They're investors that I've spoken to over the years. The one concern that they've had is they're, in one sense, they're a little bit risk averse. So they want to be, they want the FDA to have finished with the clinical trials and said yes or no, that this is working great. Let's expand the clinical trials. And I usually say to them, well, if you eliminate all the risk, it then becomes easy for me to find money. Probably I don't need to talk to you anymore. So I'm looking for someone a little more willing to take a risk. And there are risks involved, and those are presented on the Start Engine site. But what you're talking about, her name is Holmes. I think they just made a Hollywood movie about it. It's mentioned, and from some people, I say, well, you have to do your due diligence. And I've had some investors that they have visited the Safar Center in Pittsburgh to see where the research was done. And they visited Maryland Shock Trauma to see what's being done there. I mean, they didn't actually observe a patient being done, but they did a thorough job. So we've had some U.S. investors, and I've even had some representatives from China come who were very interested. They came to the U.S. just to visit us. They visited the Safar Center. They visited Maryland Shock Trauma. And it was funny, they had trouble getting back to China because the pandemic started and they were in a flight mess. So they had to stay over in California. And then they remain interested, but the diplomatic relationship, which I can't really talk about in any authoritative way, between the U.S. and China is not as open as it was. And so that makes, from my standpoint and from my little point of view, it makes the Chinese investors a little more concerned about investing when there's not a extremely friendly relationship. So they still keep in touch with me, and no one knows what the future will bring. This terrible, terrible, tragic situation in Ukraine. Once that's over, the sooner the better, obviously. Maybe then diplomatic relations will improve around the world. People have said to me, is there anything we can do in Ukraine? Well, obviously not now. I mean, we're still a clinical trial in progress. But hopefully this technology in the future will help to save lives, to give people one more chance at survival, even in combat. It's interesting. Sometimes people say, well, potentially how many lives could be saved? It's hard to put a finger on those numbers. Usually I say, well, do you have any idea of how many times CPR is done a day or a year? And how many of those patients survive? Or how many times is CPR successful? And so, I can recite those numbers. And in one sense, even if, and I only really know the numbers for the US, if CPR is done on, and there are various numbers because it's hard to get the details from what paramedics are doing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, but with CPR, it comes down to how many people know CPR. And like, there's only say if 100,000 people went to a actual class to learn CPR,
Yes.
you then, like, if they've taught that secondary to people who haven't gone to a class, like maybe 2 or 3 times, 10%
Yes.
of that, it goes up again. And if it's just someone watching a TV show and goes, oh yeah, I saw it on the TV
Yes.
show.
And,
So you can never say. So,
that's right. In the US, when they've done some surveys in questioning the public, and a most recent survey is 54% of US adults respond that yes, they know how to do CPR. So it's probably considerably less than that to really do proper CPR because, number one, just to do CPR barehanded, to do 100 to 120 or more compressions in a minute is taxing for the person doing it. You've got to be physically fit to do that. Obviously, if there's several people standing around the victim, you can hand it off to other people. And then someone has to appropriately come in with a mouth to mouth until the paramedics get there, who obviously have equipment to intubate and take care of breathing more easily and are much more experienced in doing chest compressions, and they may even have some equipment to help to automate chest compressions. There's some devices called the thumper, which sort of automatically presses to the required depth. But there's nothing really better than a well-trained CPR. Now, more and more high school students in the US are learning to do CPR. And even in earlier school situations, they're starting to learn about it, not to do it, but to learn what it is and when it's used. I know that Scandinavian countries are very good at demonstrating and teaching the principles of CPR, and sort of mock practicing, that sort of thing. And there's even a Norwegian company, which I should mention, called Lærdal. And I can get back to Lærdal and Peter Safar in a moment. But Lærdal makes some mini mannequins designed for children to practice CPR on, to make them feel like that it's important to learn it and do it, unlike a full-size practice mannequin. What it is in Great Britain, as far as, or the UK, as far as how many people know, I don't know. But the statistics are probably fairly similar to the US, adjusted for population size. They're about in the US, let's say they're approximately 500 to 560, 550 trauma injury related deaths a day. Whether it's shooting, automobile, motorcycle, someone falling off a cliff, or things like that,
Yeah.
which is a substantial number. And there may be 1,200 to 1,500 sudden cardiac arrest a day in the U.S. So the numbers are, downsized from there probably for the UK, because your population is, I don't know, what is it, 50 million or something like that?
Around about 65 to 70
Yeah.
million people approximately.
Yeah. So we're what, 6 times that or so? I mean, and in Great Britain and the rest of Europe, you have fewer mass shooting incidences by far compared to the U.S. I mean, we just had one in Sacramento where a number of people were killed, and it's hope. I mean, obviously, mass shootings shouldn't occur, but it would be nice to be able to be on the scene with EPR techniques, rapid profound hypothermia, at some point in the future. But I mentioned, go ahead.
I was going to say with EPR, and now look, it comes down to, the faster you can do it, the better the sort of survival rate. Now,
right.
The whole thing is, I would say, regarding the knowledge, getting it out there is a sort of huge monumental task, because with either sophisticated systems that your company will provide, or to one story I watched on YouTube is, they're like people like basically dumping bags on a person to lower their body temperature, to help bring their body temperature down, because they had nothing at that precise time to do it.
Yes.
But that sort of knowledge isn't commonplace, and it's not really what I would say really intuitive to what you would want to do to someone, because like with CPR, it's like, breathe in the mouth, compress to keep the heart, and then chest compressions to keep the heart going. It makes more or less logical sense to most people. But when you cool the body down, it's like, what?
Yes. You've mentioned several important points, which I'd like to talk about briefly. When CPR, standard cardiopulmonary resuscitation, was introduced, obviously it was only being done initially in an emergency room by trained physicians. Then Peter Safar trained Freedom House paramedics to do it. Okay, then he became a Pied Piper for training paramedic services around the world. That's how he became known as the father of CPR. And so it went from an emergency room setting, paramedic setting, in their other hospitals. And so it went out on a step by fashion as people became trained, and it was promoted, and eventually the American Heart Association and the Red Cross, they all got involved and were very important players in promoting this through the United States and around the world. Now, EPR, rapid profound hypothermia, will be the same. If the technique and the feasibility clinical trial is successful, and then the FDA weighs on what the next step would be, maybe a larger clinical trial, or they might say, let's do this at 10 different trauma centers. So the logical next step for us would be from clinical trial, maybe more clinical trial, to doing it at major trauma centers that can be trained and shown how to do it. Then it would be hospital emergency rooms. After that, it might be physicians and everyone on a floor at a hospital, like a crash cart if a patient required it. At some point, it would be introduced for paramedics to be able to do it out in the field, and for the military to be able to do it. The timeline for that is very hard to predict. But one thing in EPR's favor, let's say in shortening the timeline, in my own dreams or hopes, is to say that it's about saving a life. So, if it's all successful, as we hope it will be, no one's going to say, well, let's take another 10 years to roll this out. You know, if it's worked and the clinical trial looks good and the FDA is happy with it, you don't want to take 10 years to try and ramp it out to save lives anymore. We know how successful CPR can be. So I think everyone would work towards moving it out quickly. You know, it would require training and special devices to make it easy for paramedics to do in the field. And we have those techniques and plans on the drawing board and patents in preparation for those sorts of things. Now, the other thing that you mentioned, you know, and obviously you'd want to have a good sort of emergency marketing plan with the American Red Cross and the press to get the word out. And so the next thing you mentioned was like cooling, maybe with a little bit of fluid or with body wraps. That's called mild hypothermia. What we do is rapid profound hypothermia. Profound hypothermia is 5 to 15 degrees Celsius, let's say 10 degrees. Mild hypothermia is just a few degrees below normal temperature. You can't go more than 2-3 degrees below normal temperature because your heart will stop beating. If your body temperature is below, let's say 33 degrees Celsius, your heart will stop beating. So mild hypothermia is just to lower your temperature 2 or 3 degrees to take the metabolic pressure off of brain healing and body healing. And it is recommended through body wraps where they circulate a cold solution. And then they're cooling, obviously, the vessels in the blood circulating through your skin. That's recommended by the American Heart Association, and it's done throughout Europe, and I'm sure in the UK as well, for a severe heart attack where the patient doesn't go into cardiac arrest, but they're unconscious. They remain unconscious. Or you go into cardiac arrest and you're immediately resuscitated, but you remain unconscious. So a severe situation, but your heart is beating. Then they've discovered that within 1 to 6 hours, if you do mild hypothermia, that helps in the neurological recovery of the patient at a slightly lower temperature. Now that's quite a bit different than profound.
Because like the trick would be, and like this is where the difficulty comes in, like from mild hypothermia to profound hypothermia, regulating that body temperature to like make sure you're not causing harm when you're trying to save a life, if you get what I mean.
Right. The profound hypothermia, the system would be, obviously you have to give ice cold saline, 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. So you have to have that available in sufficient volume so that as you pump that rapidly into the human being and drain out any residual blood, you cool the body down to, let's say, 10, 12 degrees Celsius within 10 minutes, ideally. So that's a large cold flush. That's why, you know, this is not something that you can just, oh, we're going to do it. Yeah. You've got to be trained. You've got to have the equipment. You've got to have the catheters. You have to have the techniques to do it in a trauma center, in an emergency room. But it's all ultimately adaptable to be done in a portable way out of an ambulance. Okay. I mean, I can go into more technical details about it if you want me to, but mild is easily done. In some places, if you have ice cold saline, if you have someone who had a heart attack and you resuscitated them and they're unconscious, and you want to cool them down just a couple of degrees, you can give them 500 mLs of cold saline. It's not going to stop their heart from beating. You could give them cold whole blood if you have it. And that just takes the edge off of 37 degrees Celsius. And so that could be done, or the body wraps, as I mentioned. And they'll do that for, let's say, 2 days. And hopefully you regain consciousness. They have to keep you sedated while you're mildly hypothermic. And hopefully it helps recovery. I mean, it's recommended for being done in cases, as I described, cardiac arrest that's resuscitated, where you remain unconscious. So, the studies show that it's, at least the studies that have been done to date show that it's beneficial. And the same in EPR. If you put someone in profound hypothermia and you do the surgical repairs immediately afterwards, and if you're fortunate and you get them resuscitated, you don't want to take them up to 37 degrees Celsius like that. What you want to take them up to a point where their heart is beating, but keep them mildly hypothermic, the way you did for an unconscious heart attack victim that needed to be resuscitated, because it takes the burden off of, but let's say it limits potential neurological problems. So there's a lot going on, a lot of things to do. It's not as simple as putting on a tourniquet.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't say it would be, because
no, I know you're not saying that.
No, because this is the thing, when I listen to you speak, and basically keeping up as much as I can at this present time, but with regards to, yes, EPR, and yes, the treatment and getting it done rapidly, just from the sort of the saline solutions and the temperature control, do you think it would be more prudent to have say a specialist sort of ambulance, what will come along to say a trauma situation, to say a mass shooting, to rather than sort of have a conventional bus, which has to carry everything, but this is just focused purely on more extreme trauma and just deals with 2 patients at a time?
Yes. If everything went well and you're going to move forward with having this done in the field, ideally you might want to have a specially designed ambulance, or adapt an ambulance so that you could keep your solution cold just during the quick drive to the patient. In other words, an ambulance is usually parked somewhere, and frequently they plug into an electrical outlet in order to power up what equipment may need to be powered on board for emergency use. So they could instantaneously, when they get a call, grab a transportable unit with 20 or 40 liters of ice cold solution in a sort of like an ice chest that would keep it cold, just in case they needed it. And obviously in the ambulance, they could have other specialized equipment to rapidly pump that solution into the patient via specialized catheter and the techniques to do this. Also, there's systems available now where a paramedic can wearing appropriate headgear and cameras, can be in touch with a trauma physician back at the hospital to assist visually and verbally with any decision support or techniques that might be implemented by the paramedic. Even though the paramedic will be fully trained and capable, sometimes in decision support, it's good to have a quick second opinion. That kind of thing can be done now. And there's some systems in some cities that have that capability. Just as I know that I think all of the major airlines, if there's an emergency on board, they can immediately plug into let's say a university emergency response capability just to get input information to the flight attendant who's trained to do certain things. But if some more information is needed, they've got a backup right there. And I think most major airlines contract for 24/7 call assistance to a medical center. At least I know that many did that in the past.
Yeah.
And it's probably still followed. A little funny, not funny, but a side story, well, sort of funny, that we were talking about training people and the use of mannequins. I mentioned how in Scandinavia, a big medical company called Laerdal that makes training mannequins to teach CPR, and they make full body simulators, where physicians can actually, medical students and physicians can actually do procedures on this full body mannequin that might breathe, it might have a heartbeat, and the software will simulate different problems. And usually university medical centers, they all have simulation centers now for doing research and training physicians and medical teams. It's been shown in the past that that nurses and physicians working at a hospital, if they periodically train as a team to do CPR, even though they all know how to do CPR, but if they practice as a group, they're more effective, because if the alarm is sounded and they go into a patient's room to do CPR, they don't spend any precious time looking at each other saying, well, who's in charge? Who's got the backboard? Who's going to do chest compression? Who's going to do this? They know how to work in a team. And that takes more than just the medical knowledge. It takes a team practice. And so simulation enables them to do that. And so many hospital centers do that. And it'll be true for EPR too. But so simulators go from a simple child simulator for learning what CPR is to larger ones. Now, after Dr. Safar developed the techniques for mouth-to-mouth and CPR, he met a man by the name of Osmund Laerdal, if that's how his first name is pronounced. He was a Norwegian doll maker. And if I recall correctly, don't double check me on this, that he was innovator in making dolls' eyes close when you put them down to go to bed. Okay. Before that, the eyes were just, stayed in place.
Even with it's creepy as hell.
So he was a doll manufacturer, and then he got involved with Peter Safar in the early days, and he started making simulators for practicing CPR. And now Laerdal is a big medical company. They make defibrillators and other medical equipment. I don't think they make baby dolls anymore. But the first full-size simulator for CPR was called Resuscitation or Resuscitation. I don't know, a lot of people haven't heard. If you search Resusci, RESUSCI-Annie or ANNE, you'll come up with information about it. And the face of Resuscitation is actually a death mask that was taken from a young woman who drowned herself in Paris in the Seine River. And, there's a history to all of that. And there's a museum that has resuscitation memorabilia and has more stories about that. If you look up Resuscitation Museum, you can find it on Google. But it was a death mask that they used for the first Resuscitation. And I've seen one of the early ones that is at the Safar Center in Pittsburgh. They've had one of the early ones Dr. Safar used. So it's just an interesting aside that this doll manufacturer started making resuscitation mannequins, and those kinds of things are still made today after 60 years or more.
Like one of the things I do like love about the story, like you're telling, and basically the sort of advancement in technology with simulators and everything like this. It's like the way I see these simulators being used. Yes, help build that sort of teamwork, get that sort of automatic pattern reflex. Because, okay, I imagine in a hospital people crash a lot, and like, yes, you can like go, okay, yeah, we can practice on that person there and then, but it's, you make a mistake, that person's dead, you know what I mean, and you act will can really affect anyone who's there. If it's someone who's new to the job, it could like destroy their confidence, or it will be like, okay,
Yes.
With the simulator, yes, if someone screws up, it's like you screwed up here, 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 here. Or if they get it right, they'll be like, you got everything right here, here, there, there, and there. And when you say yes, the simulator, which kind of a little bit freaks me out, is where you have like, yes, like breathing, doing like the whole simulation so you can actually operate and like treat that simulation. Like, because some people go, yes, it's an excellent replacement for like working on like cadavers, which many medical students does. But I would say that is not the best way of doing it. I would say it's best to have that as a support, like mechanism to still working on the cadavers, because it's one thing working on an inanimate object, even though it's filled with technology to respond and everything like this, than actually, you know, dealing with a human body, even if
absolutely. I mean, in one sense, you're absolutely right. But in one sense, it's done in stages. If you're a medical student, you'll work on a simulator. You know, if you're learning how to treat a diabetic patient that's comatose, and you do various things, and the computer is showing you certain data, and you're responding to those reasons and that information. And if you do the wrong thing, you know, the computer lets you know you killed the patient, and you get to do it again until you get it right. But then when you're in a hospital with a real patient, there's always someone more senior with you who's more experienced. So you're learning there. He's double checking you before you do something. And even in surgery, you know, you don't start off, you know, you may be an intern or a resident doing some things in surgery, assisting more experienced, and little by little, you move up in your experience. You know, for simulators, they always have, I know at major medical centers, aside from a simulator at the laboratory that you go alone or with a group to practice a procedure on, or whatever it is you're practicing, they also have what are called just-in-time simulations. And those are some, let's say, smaller body part simulators that can be taken to the floor of a hospital. And if you're going to be doing a procedure on a patient, and even though you might be experienced, you say, well, you know, there's slightly something different in this patient, perhaps. Let me just do this or go through the procedure just on a simulator just before I go in and do it on the patient. And so it's called just-in-time simulation, you know, and that's been shown to have some benefit in just refreshing some difficulties or some problems that can be addressed in that way. And the same will be true in EPR. If we get to the point of introducing training materials and simulation materials, you know, we want to do all of that so that everyone can feel trained up to do this, from point of injury to the trauma center, all levels of medical personnel and support staff. It's going to be a continuum.
Yeah, no, like this is the thing. Like you have been in the medical game for a healthy chunk of time. Like, yeah,
Absolutely.
like the
A
sort
big
of,
chunk.
yeah, well, just a healthy chunk, not too big, just a healthy chunk. Yeah, the sort of quantum leap in technology changed from when you first started to now. Like, what has like surprised you the most, like over your course of time, and what do you think, what sort of futures are you kind of like going, wow, that's going to be amazing if that comes up off,
Yes.
apart from
For me, it's the use. For me, the biggest change has been the use of, let's say, information systems and artificially intelligent systems. You know, when I was an intern and a resident, if you were seeing patients, you didn't have a way of rapidly looking up what's on that drug, if you know what's happening with that drug. If you were taking the history and physical of a patient, and you were the lowest one on the totem pole, and you went in and the patient said, well, I'm taking this and that, and off the top of your head you didn't know what the side effects of that drug were, and you had to go out of the room perhaps to look it up in some textbook. Now it's right there on your smartphone. A huge amount of information, that you can have a subscription to, usually for the best information on procedures and everything. So that's had a tremendous impact, and artificially intelligent systems to back up medical knowledge for care. I think the next most important thing have been systems, computerized systems that are able to take MRI information, real-time MRI information, or real-time scan information, and give it to the surgeon so that he can use that information in a three-dimensional way for doing things in the body, particularly in orthopedic surgery, in minimally invasive surgery. There's so much that can be done with cameras. Examples, let's say men who need prostate biopsies, it can be, the needle can be directed by a real-time visual information through a scan. So that has really changed things. Precision medicine, in a sense, has been it, I think.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And
I mean, genetics obviously, has been a big intervention. Everything related to that. I guess mRNA vaccines have been the latest thing in understanding messenger and how that works. And I just got my second booster a week ago. So I have had 4 COVID vaccine shots, the 2 original, 1 booster, and then a second booster.
You see, like I've had my 2 shots, and and like this is the thing, I got COVID just after, like just in January. So like I think I'm fully covered for the next I think 6 months. Well, 6 months from January. So yeah.
Yeah, I've actually, with vaccinations, I've actually had some fun, not to pat myself on the back, but in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I live outside of Washington, and all over Maryland and true in other states as well, we have what's called the Medical Reserve Corps. So people who aren't actively seeing patients, I don't actively see patients, I'm involved in the EPR technologies. I volunteered to be an immunizer for COVID. So I would go to various, wherever they were doing it, and you'd spend all day there vaccinating people. Initially, people had appointments and then hopefully walk-ins. But the fun part was when they started vaccinating, 5 to 12-year-olds, because they were very They were always enjoyable. Yes, some would cry, some had to be restrained by their parents, but many were amusing. I remember one little kid comes, he sits down in the chair and he says to me, "Have you ever done this before?"
just once or twice.
Yes, I said no. I said to him, "No, you're the first one." And I would always have candy.
Yeah, it's like yeah. It's like, yeah, look at this hand. He goes, yeah, oh, steady as a rock. Yeah,
absolutely.
To inject you with.
absolutely.
Yeah, so
I think the UK is probably fairly well vaccinated too. Montgomery County is very heavily vaccinated. The people over the age of 65, it must be close to 100% are fully vaccinated. And for everyone over 5, it must be, it's very high as well.
I don't know the exact numbers of the UK vaccinations, but I would say it's in the 80% range, maybe higher. Basically, yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, we basically vaccinated everyone with the double dose fairly quickly. And then I think subsequent, like sort of triple, quadruple, that kind of, I don't know where that is. I don't think it's on the same rate as the double dose, if you get what I mean.
Yes.
Because I think it's just some people, like rightly or wrongly, you know what I mean? Okay, how many doses do we have to like take? Because when I hear vaccination, and I think with other many people, it's like, oh, you're gonna get a vaccine. It's like one and done. Okay, you've had your couple of shots, off you go. It's more like it's more of a flu booster shot, if you get what I mean, rather than a vaccination. I'm no medical practitioner, but when it's like you've got to come back for a booster,
it's almost like the annual flu shot.
Absolutely,
as the virus changes. But they're testing. I don't follow closely, but they're testing sort of a universal once and done flu shot, or once in a booster, and that lasts for years and years. Like for like some of the other vaccines, like shingles. You don't have to get it every 6 months, and they're working on that for coronavirus too. If they can make a successful vaccine that is not just to the spike that keeps changing, you can get one that lasts a long time because the virus doesn't change that part of itself. But that's more difficult to do. Now in Maryland, I follow in Maryland. Thank goodness. There's only maybe 2, 3, 4 at most people die a day from COVID complications. And there's probably some very elderly, maybe some immunocompromised people. Hard to say. Maybe there are a few people who still haven't been vaccinated, but that's a very small number now, 2 to 3 a day. And across Maryland, there are only about maybe around 30 people occupying intensive care beds who have COVID, which is also a small number. Obviously larger across the U.S., but Maryland our governor has done an excellent job in what would the word be, in rolling out and convincing everyone to get vaccines.
Oh yeah, because this is the thing, there was a time where, okay, I would say just around about January time when, let's just say the British government was getting themselves into trouble because of a party over here and a party over there. But they were looking at infection rates, but then it was like, okay, if you looked at the infection rates, yes, they were sky high. But if you looked at the sort of mortality rates, it was no different than sort of a normal month pre the COVID times. So it's like, okay, rightly or some people will go the government was wrong to get rid of lockdowns and stuff like this, but we've gone past that point now where it was yes, we can stop COVID, nip it in the bud, it will go away. unfortunately, it's here to stay, and
Oh, absolutely.
I don't see it going anywhere, because by the time you've like taken care of one variant, another variant comes up, and
Yes.
it's always chasing your tail. So it's like, yes, get used to it. It's here. So we've got to make that sort of transition to like new normal. No, forget the new normal,
Absolutely.
and like, see what happens, because eventually, if it goes the way most sort of like pathogens go, it's like, it finds its way to, it doesn't want to kill its host immediately. It wants it to
Right.
live on. So hopefully, but in our lifetimes, like, yes, COVID will be nothing more than like a cold, if you get what I mean. You know?
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with that. And I'm pretty well, I feel well protected. I'm pretty well back to normal, going to restaurants, eating indoors.
It's like, seeing people. It's like, giving them a
That's right.
hug.
That's right.
Yeah. So with this, and like, yes, with like EPR, like, I know you've got the FDA approval to go through to like make that like once that goes through, like things
For the feasibility clinical trial.
with the clinical trial. Yeah. But is there other sort of avenues you sort of taking, like, just while you're waiting for this trial to come through? Other sort of routes you're taking into the medical field with
Not really. I mean, there is some research in the area of rapid profound hypothermia being done. Obviously, the U.S. Army has been instrumental in funding the research and the clinical trial, and they funded the early days of CPR, as I mentioned, and so we're working on continuing to expand our patents in preparation. We want to put those in. It's part of the reason we're trying to crowdfund raising money again, because it's costly to put in patents, not only in the U.S., even more costly around the world. And so that's what we're focused on now. And, and waiting for a clinical trial, the results, and the next step there. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's inevitable because it works in large animals. There was the scientific news reporting that it had been done in a person for the first time, and then we've sort of waiting for the clinical trial completion in the next step. So we're pursuing. We won't accept failure. We would just be back at the lab doing more if we were forced to do something like that. So this is going to happen at some point. It's hard to predict the timing, and we hope, as I said, people go to the crowdfunding site for EPR technologies at Start Engine and maybe own a piece of the future along with us and help saving lives. And so that's the hope. I'll do this as long as I'm able.
Right. Well, I wish you a youthful life ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I may be physically old, but mentally I'm quite young.
Physically old?
Fortunately.
You're mere but a whippersnapper, sir.
Yes.
A whippersnapper. Yeah. Have you thought about doing partnerships with, say, other companies to like sort of like help move the ball down the field?
I've spoken to people about that, and there is some interest, but companies want to wait until the proof is there. They don't. There has to be a real clear success demonstration, but that's the possibility in the future. Right now, it's even though it's tough raising money, there's a certain amount of fun involved, and getting out there and doing things and not turning it over to someone else. But that's certainly a possibility in the future. partner with someone or to be purchased outright. I guess you can partner with someone larger who's got deep pockets. You could be bought outright at some point by some larger pharmaceutical or medical device company, or you can have the fun of doing an IPO and waiting until you're bought out and, taking that. So there are those possibilities. I work with several people who are experienced in all of this, who give advice and help me along. And that's how I was put into the crowdfunding, which is extremely popular now. I mean, if people go to Start Engine, I hope they focus on EPR technologies, but there's an interesting range of medical and non-medical startup companies that you can invest in. If a person has a mind to do that, it's interesting to track it. And Start Engine says that they have 500,000 people who track their site and have invested, various amounts of money, from small amounts to larger amounts, in the range of companies that they've put on their site over time. So that's a large, if each of those 500,000 people put in $100, I'd be satisfied.
So, I bet you would. I bet you would.
Absolutely. If that happened, I'd do another podcast with you immediately.
And I'll charge you. No.
That'd be fine.
No. You heard it here, people. Yeah.
One can hope.
But
sure. Seriously, people should go to the site, look at everything, and make a decision without any help or promises. I'm making no promises. They should just look at the site and read what's truth and has been had compliance and due diligence done on.
May I ask, what was the one thing what surprised you about this process?
About the Start Engine process?
No, basically about starting EPR, like basically getting this company up and running to get like everything. But what was
right.
like, it was
I guess off the top of my head, I would say the amount of information and animal experimentation and time that it took the FDA to say, okay, this is something we would consider for a feasibility trial. It wasn't like an overnight thing. It took several years. And then I was, I had heard some things about Start Engine or crowdfunding, and I was simply amazed at the amount of due diligence and information that I had to provide them for them to read every word to make sure that everything was as portrayed. What were the benefits, the possibilities, any risks associated with it, and all of that is up on the site for people to see. And I was quite amazed at the depth of knowledge that they made us present. And in one sense, I see that in contrast to what you had mentioned about the rapid drop of blood testing from from that company. It's like all the people were hoodwinked into putting in money without doing any proper due diligence, without really getting some experts in there to look at what equipment they had and what was being done. It could only have been done in a shoddy way, I would think, but I don't know.
Yeah, because like this is the thing, like, okay, with like sort of with Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos and everything like this. Okay, now there are certain things where you can fake it until you make it. There are certain things you can do that with, and like when it comes to sort of big tech companies where it's like program languages and everything like this, yes, that is true. You can do that, but what I don't understand is she dropped out of college do it like, so she didn't even have, I think she had about a semester, like a year and maybe a bit of medical training. I don't care what anyone says, like you can't have any sort of authority if you're like dropping out after about a year and a bit of medical training. It takes 7 years to become a doctor, and like it takes like to be a specialist. It takes another God knows how many years on top of that, and then to be able to like go apply that to a new form of technology. It's like, okay, blood, and I only know this because I've listened to the podcast, I've read the book, and like basically I've watched part of the TV series on Disney Plus. I'm not watching that because I've listened to everything else. Blood is quite a very difficult thing to sort of get analysis from. You can't get it from a very small volume. You need to have a large amount of volume, because if you start to put it through a number of tests, it starts sending off false positives about a number of different things. Like the fact that none of these guys seem to consult anyone who has any sort of know-how in blood
I agree.
amazes me. And they're not, you would say they're not stupid people, you know?
Yeah, you're right. They're not stupid people, but people can get, I don't know, can get convinced of something if a friend or an associate is doing it. You know, it's like people, in a sense, they listen to propaganda. They don't know how to gather information themselves. I mean, it's an area that I'm not, an expert in, but if I hear something on the news or TV, you look for several sources before you believe it if it's something important to you. You know, you can't just accept it. But people do. It's like it's reminiscent of the Bernie Madoff story. Remember that? Yes. Bernie Madoff in New York. He had been, on Wall Street, and he was taking millions and millions of dollars from celebrities, and then claiming successful investment, and it was all a sham. And people are looking for a quick success, and they don't put in the time to investigate.
Yeah, no, like this is the thing. Getting a quick buck quite often leads
exactly
astray. It's like, yeah, sitting down, doing the due diligence, like sitting down, basically taking that little bit of extra time to like go, is this right? Is this wrong? Will I lose my shirt on this? Will I be like being made to look foolish? Or is this like, yeah, the next big thing? And if people sat down and went, okay, yeah, right, I understand this, great. Right. With Bernie Madoff, it's a little bit more difficult because he was around for such a long time. You kind of like, it was kind of institutionalized.
Have a little confidence in him.
Yes. With like Theranos, I was like when you kind of like, if I was there at the time, I most probably would have, I won't lie, I would have most probably went with it and went, yes, that's amazing. But when you kind of look back at it in hindsight, you're like, oh, what are you guys doing? And I think it's one of those things which I think, unfortunately, for anyone who's involved in sort of the medical technology side, it's not, I think it's a case of, because of that so fresh in people's minds, because the trial is not even over yet, I think it's one of those things which I think it will make it a little bit still challenging for investment. But it's a case of, look, you've got the years of experience, you've got the research, you've done, like, you've had to put in the work just to, like, for the FDA to get the trial going.
Start engine.
Yeah, and for Start Engine as well. So, you've done a hell of a lot more than a certain company which was in Silicon Valley, which is now no more. And the founder looks like she might be going to prison for a healthy chunk of time,
And the requests on Start Engine are very modest. It's a very modest first step. So it's not like what people did with Elizabeth Holmes or Bernie Madoff,
No, no, let's
as far
not.
as the magnitude of things.
Yeah, no, we'll keep those out of. We'll keep them out of this lovely conversation. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yes. So one of the things I have to ask, like, when you watch, like, say, a medical show on TV, this would be like one of my last questions. How many times do you look at them and go, watch these shows and go, oh my God, how comes they're so wrong? Or has there been many a show which, like, oh, you've got
Well,
it.
to be honest, I really don't watch medical shows.
Really?
And again, to tell you, not because I'm on with you, but my favorite streaming channels are BritBox and Acorn, the two British streaming channels,
Yeah.
because they really have the best crime shows. I love Vera. It is excellent. And a number of other shows. But, I can't remember the name of the American show, but a few years ago, when there was talk about EPR, maybe 5 years ago, the researchers would do presentations. And I guess there was some word out about it, that there was a TV medical drama that on a patient that was dying or they couldn't resuscitate, they said, well, let's use EPR. It was just something on the show that was said, and briefly said. And I was told that. So it was mentioned on TV, but, it wasn't like it was a whole show about it. Now, it has been mentioned on some science shows in the past,
Mhm.
And so, as I say, it's been mentioned on some things, but nothing extreme. There's been no whole show devoted to it. But medical shows, I don't routinely watch, or the dating shows.
Wow. Hey, Lynn, I don't know, man. Like,
I watch home box office. I loved Game of Thrones and The Sopranos.
Yeah.
And science fiction movies. I mentioned Aliens and Stanley Kubrick. I liked all of his movies, of course. What else? They almost don't make classic movies anymore, do they?
Not really. Well, like, this is the thing. There are some films which might eventually become classics, but what I would simply say is TV shows it seems to be where it's at. If you like your science fiction, you must have watched this. The Expanse.
Yes, I've watched a couple of the episodes. I haven't had chance for continuing. There's another one, I think it's a German one, called The Dark.
I haven't watched.
Another time traveling show. And of course, there's always Doctor Who, which is sort of a funny science fiction show. Yeah, most, weekly, hourly TV shows, I don't watch a lot of those.
Okay.
I watch Bill Maher, the comedian.
I know the one.
Political. I watch that, or I record it and watch it later. And then Saturday Night Live, usually has some good bits. And the update news part is very funny. I always enjoyed Seinfeld, which is occasionally I see a rerun, but watch CNN, MSNBC. I'm not a fan of Fox News, but mostly streaming. The news, Fox News, MSNBC, maybe public television news, and then streaming, BritBox, Acorn, Netflix. What else do I get? Oh, the other one I get is Criterion Channel. Have you ever heard of Criterion? No. Criterion is the channel that has all the classic movies from around the world. So they'll have French films. They'll have films from, the J. Arthur Rank the British film producer from years ago, the Rank organization,
Yes.
that has all the old Alec Guinness films. So they'll have those kind of films and the classic American films. You should look it up, Criterion Channel. It costs less than Netflix. Maybe in US dollars, I don't know, it costs maybe $10 or $12 a month, something in that range. And they really, they put up new films every month, and some films go away. But any art house movie, as they would use the term art house movie,
Yes.
that's worth watching, they'll have.
Wow.
Whether it's Italian or British or German or American or Japanese. They have a lot of Japanese films, a lot of Italian films. Like over periods of time, they'll show all of Fellini and Akira Kurosawa films from Japan.
Ooh.
And so they show all of those, and usually they'll have, with a really classic film, they'll have commentary. Like it might be commentary during the film,
Mm-hmm.
so you can watch it with or without commentary, or they'll have special interviews from the directors or other people who participated in the film. There's an outstanding movie that they've had on recently called, I don't know it's a Russian-Ukrainian movie called Come and See. And it's about World War II and what the Nazis did. And I think what they were primarily doing in Ukraine in the time, and the murder and the outrage. And it's a young boy who joins the resistance, and he's sort of naive at the beginning and becomes a hardened, resistance fighter in the end, fighting against the Nazis. I'm blanking on the name of the director. Not that I could pronounce it anyway, but it's one of the greatest films ever made. I think in the opinions of film critics, not me. It's an enjoyable film to watch, for sure. It's different. But this past month, it's been on the Criterion Channel. Otherwise, I guess it's hard to find.
Oh, trust me, I will find it. And I'll watch it. And I'll come back with you, like a lot of feedback for you. Yeah. Oh,
I'm a bit of a classical film buff, not an expert, from the standpoint of just watching. I can't get, they have Turner Classic Movies here in the U.S. Does that show in the U.K.? Turner, who started CNN, Ted Turner. He also, it's called Turner Classic Movies. And each movie is introduced by a host who has some interesting, history about the film, or, the different facts, like, who was asked to be Han Solo before Harrison Ford, or who was asked to be the Godfather before Marlon Brando, or, little stuff like that is always interesting to hear. And then they always show classic movies, like during Oscar month, they show, the award-winning films the whole month, films that had Oscars. So something to do from 10:30 to 12:30 at night, perhaps.
Okay, I shall hold that in a great
right. I mean, I do then a couple of things.
Yeah.
EPR, watch movies, and a volunteer vaccinator when I have the time.
And you know what?
And also I occasionally paint. That's one of the very first paintings I did that you can see behind me.
Okay. Yes.
I started painting shortly after my wife passed away in 2014, and started painting, continued to paint. And since then, I've been doing internet dating. Is the other thing I do on the internet. That's as much as I'll say about that. But I'm a man of old generation and new.
Okay. On that happy note, I'm gonna end it there before.
Okay. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. An absolute pleasure.
The joy has been all mine, sir. The joy has been all mine. And look, can you tell the lovely people out there how they can find you so they can have have more interactions with you? And hey, ladies, maybe on the dating front, say no more. Like,
well, can I hold up my sign again?
please do.
You can, the address at the bottom, you can ask contact, and it'll get to me. You know, at the address above of Start Engine, you can put in a comment asking something of me or EPR, and I'll respond to you within 24 hours. You know, or also at the Start Engine site. When you get down into the profile section, you see me. I'm also on LinkedIn. So all of those are ways of connecting with me via the Start Engine contact site. I'll see that very quickly, because as soon as someone posts the contact there, it's immediately sent to me, and I'll do my very best to respond, as long as you're not looking for a date for dinner.
Dinner, maybe. Date.
Maybe.
Feed me. I'll be very happy. My ladies.
If I see you, I'll feed you. Next time I'm in the UK, I'll definitely look you up.
I'm right, you will. But yeah, I'll put all of that information into the show notes, into the description. So yes, by Lyn, yeah. So it'll be all great. And Lyn, I'd like to say thank you for you coming on today. Yes.
It's been an absolute pleasure and great opportunity.
Awesome. And I'd like to say thank you to you, my friends, my life warriors out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay healthy. Enjoy life.
Indeed, indeed. Let me just say thank you to you, my friends, my life warriors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Stay well, stay safe, be awesome, be excellent, be fantastic.
Same to you in the audience.
Yeah, and be all the positive beings you can be. And we are out of here. Yeah. Okay.